Everybody, welcome again. Huge pleasure to be able to do this. I think we have, I think, a small, but I must say very select group of people here. I know so many of you by name, now also by face, and I know that we have people here who really care passionately about the translation and putting the literature of this part of the world out to of course, the rest of the world, but also to each other. English with all of the baggage that it carries for all of us. Somehow it is equally alien and so somehow equally acceptable in a strange way to everybody in South Asia. And it is, for better or worse, the language that we can all try and connect in. So thank you all for the work that you guys do. It's amazing to be here. My job today is just to say a couple of quick thank yous and then get out of the way and then just sit back and enjoy this event, which is a joy and a privilege. And for that, I have to thank, I think to start with Lydia, who a lot of you have been interacting with. She has been an absolute champ and instrumental in us being able to coordinate and put this together. So thank you, Lydia. A big thank you to you. Of course, everyone else on the Himal team, Shweta, who will be running the show as well today, and everybody else from the Himal team in the background. On behalf of all of us at Himal, I also want to remind all of you that the reason we can do things like this is because we are an independent magazine. We don't have any corporate owners or politicians or anyone who's calling the shots, but that means that we rely on all of you guys, on people just like you coming forward as Himal patrons and becoming paying supporters of the magazine so we can keep growing our work. So please support us if you can, and if you can't, help us spread the word about what we do and the support that we need. The running order today, I think, just very quickly, there's going to be introductions of the featured translators. So a big welcome and a big thank you to all the translators who are featured today. I mean, we had a huge amount compared to the last time we did a Translation Fiction Fest of submissions. I know that some of you who submitted are also here in attendance. Thank you for joining us. And to everyone who submitted and took the time and takes the time to do this work, thank you so much. After that, we're going to have a conversation where Shweta will be hosting a conversation between Parwana, welcome, and Deepa, welcome. And a big thank you to both of you as well. A huge pleasure to have you with us. And we are going to close things off with a big drum roll and a big announcement from the Armory Prize. They will be announcing their winner for the year. It's really a joy to be partnering with the Armory Prize again. So Jason and the whole crew, thank you guys for joining hands with us again. I will step out now, sit back, and leave you guys in Shweta's hands. Shweta, take it away.
Thank you, Roman, and welcome everyone. We've got a wonderful lineup ahead, so I'll keep this brief as well. Himal's Fiction Fest over the past few years has become a space for showcasing some of the most exciting new fiction and translation from across South Asia. And one of the things we've especially loved about the Fiction Fest is the range of voices, languages, and literary traditions it brings together. Last year, we focused on speculative fiction from the region, and this time we're returning to translation. We're seeing such an incredible range of translators, writers, and publishers doing the work of bringing South Asian literature into conversation with one another. And tonight's event really is a celebration of that. And that's why we're also especially thrilled to be organizing this event again in partnership with Armory Square Prize for South Asian Literature and Translation, which has done such important work in recognizing and supporting literary translation from the region. And Himal has tried to create space for South Asian fiction and literary conversation that deserve wider attention through projects like Fiction Fest. So if you'd like to support our work, please consider becoming a paying Himal patron. We'll drop the link in the chat below. The first story of Fiction Fest will be going live this evening, and we have a great lineup of 5 more short stories to follow. Next week, we've got a very special masterclass with the celebrated writer Rakshanda Jalil on fiction and translation. We'll share the registration link for that as well. And just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Please keep your mics muted unless you're speaking, and feel free to use the chat to share any thoughts, comments, questions throughout the event. This session is being recorded and will be available later on Himal's YouTube channel for anyone who'd like to revisit or share it. And to begin tonight's program, we'll first hear brief introductions from this year's translators, each speaking a little about the stories they've translated. After that, I'll be in conversation with the writer and translator Deepa Bhasthi and the scholar, poet, and translator Parwana Fayyaz. And finally, like Roman said, we'll close the evening with the announcement of the shortlist and winner of the 2026 Armory Square Prize. So with that, let's begin. To start us off, I'd like to invite Ronak Bath, who will introduce his translation of Amin Kamil's Kashmiri short story, The Shroud Thief. Ronak, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shweta. I would just like to read out my translator's note to introduce the short story that I've translated. Let's go. In a Kashmiri village, the dead are suddenly denied the right to rest in peace, one by one. Soon, the horror shifts from the ordeal itself to the way the living learn to live with it. Written over 60 years ago, The Shroud Thief, or Kafan Soor, initially titled Jahannami, or The Hellborn, carries ripples of Kashmir's recent history and continues to resonate in the present too. Even though the story makes no direct reference to politics or conflict, it bears facets of angst, frenzy, grief, enforced silence, and the spectacle making of violence, all of which have an unfortunate centrality to life in Kashmir. It also serves as a literary archive of an acceptance, tiresome as it may be, of an unforeseen shock, of the grim scars of years of turmoil in the region. A milestone in Kashmiri fiction, The Shroud Thief operates on a broader metaphorical level. The thief is a personification of something unseen yet unsettling, larger forces that disrupt order and dignity among those living in conflict zones, and that remain difficult, even impossible to resist. The villagers find comfort in vague explanations like devils, strangers, and anything that distracts them from facing the underlying truth. It is a fairly human reaction. In environments shaped by conflict, where blame is rarely clear and often displaced. The story's absurd conclusion lingers in the mind long after the narrative has come to an end. Once feared and viciously cursed, Gunabab is, all of a sudden, fondly remembered. Uncomfortable as it may sound, such a shift can feel truthful in a place like Kashmir. This bizarre turn becomes a rude reminder of how, during hardship, people in conflict regions begin to measure which suffering is more tolerable instead of questioning the suffering in the first place. By the end, the story transcends the frame of a simple graveyard mystery. Kamil's crisp telling makes it a potent study of how people change under duress, how grief and fear can influence morality, and what humans can ultimately learn to live with. The Shroud Thief then does more persuading. Its coldness spotlights the truth of an uncomfortable way of life, which slowly settles with me. Now, I would just like to read out the bio of the author that I've translated, Amin Kamil. Amin Kamil, born in 1924, he passed away in 2014, was a prominent Kashmiri poet, short story writer, critic, and editor, widely regarded as a pioneer of modern Kashmiri fiction. He began his career in 1947 practicing law before joining Sri Pratap College in Srinagar as a lecturer. Upon close association with the progressive writers movement, he shifted from writing in Urdu to writing in Kashmiri. He later served the Jammu and Kashmir Cultural Academy as convener for Kashmiri language and as the editor of literary journals such as Shiraz and so on other. His work, which is noted for a blend of humor, irony, and socio-political commentary, includes the novel Kritimans Gash, published in 1950, the 1966 short story collection Katmanskar, also featuring the celebrated short story Kakurjang, and poems like Dayanama. Kamil has also edited a noted collection of Kashmiri humor and contributed to the development of the modern Kashmiri alphabet. Hailed by the poet Dinanath Nadim as Amir-e-Ghazal, which is the master of the ghazal, Kamil received the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1967 and Padma Shri in 2005. Now, a little bit about myself. My name is Ronak, and I'm an editor and emerging literary translator working between English, Kashmiri, Urdu, and Hindi. My debut translations are forthcoming in August in the Penguin India anthology called The Big Book of Kashmiri Literature. My work has been featured in People's Archive for Rural India, the Bombay Lit Magazine, Import Journal, and People's Kashmir. I have previously worked for Penguin Southeast Asia, the Indian Express, and News Traffic. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronak. Next, we'll hear from Gaya Nagahawata, who has translated Pia Karivasam's Sinhala story, The Scintillating Darkness Cited by the Aged Blacksmith. Gaya, over to you. Gaya, you're muted.
Yes, sorry. Hello everyone. It's great to be here with the Himal Fiction Fest. One second, I closed. Okay. Greetings, everyone. So I'm Gaya Nagahawata, translator and educator. I feel privileged to be here among such a distinguished gathering. And I thank Himal Fiction Fest for bringing all these diverse writers and translators together to share space with each other. We celebrate as we read and learn from a diverse selection of stories across South Asia. So I'm here with my translation of P.L. Karivasam's short story, Acharisiya Dutudidulana Andakarya. P.L. is a writer, dramatist, lecturer, and former lawyer. This story is from his third collection of stories. And it won him the first state award for the best short story collection. And this is the title story. And I've translated it as The Scintillating Darkness Cited by the Aged Blacksmith, a long title with an oxymoron. It is more or less a description of the times it was written in, around 2004 to 2007, around a time when Sri Lanka was in the midst of the ethnic conflict that had largely overshadowed our lives. This story was published in 2008. Although overshadowing the ethnic conflict, this particular story deals with armed conflict through the eyes of villagers, focusing on an elderly blacksmith, young rebels, and the military. And it is more descriptive of the last 3 decades of Sri Lankan history, when different sort of rebellions took place. And it's reflective of all of that. It's also universal in a different way. Okay, so it is a comparatively short story, one of the shortest by P.L. himself, even to date. But I would say it will occupy your mind long after it is read. And that is what attracted me to it. As a translator, I felt pleasantly challenged. This story has a lot of material packed in. It is very visual and engaging. Hope you will connect with it in its English translation. In terms of the translation, I had to look for words for certain things, because in Sinhala, what is given as kolla, for instance, how do you translate that into English? Lad was the first word that came to mind, but it seemed in modern day English, in the English world, lad doesn't work accurately to describe the sort of situation that it relates to an old way of explaining things. So, and it's very much a British kind of word, so it didn't fit in. So things like that, and also other elements that were that are very specific culturally to Sri Lanka. So I had to find a way to connect these. So it has gone through a lot of editing and a lot of back and forth about how to represent it and make it also accessible to a community outside of Sri Lanka, particularly. So to tell a little bit about P.L. Karivasam, P.L. Karivasam is a Sri Lankan writer, theatre practitioner, and lecturer. He has published 6 works of fiction, staged more than 5 theatre productions, and written and directed films across various genres. He has won over 14 national awards, including state literary awards for Best Short Story Collection and Best Original Theatre, and a lot of other awards for drama and also some for film. And then Karivasam has served as a jury member for State Theatre Literature and Film Awards, and was a member of the State Literary Panel and also the Theatre Panel. Originally written in Sinhala, several of his works have been translated into English and more recently into Urdu, with further English and Tamil translations forthcoming. His latest collection of short stories was published in December 2025, and it's a lot of discussion is happening over that at the moment. And also one of those stories have been translated to Urdu. So that was significant for me as well, because I was the one who compiled that collection and gave for Urdu translation. And so in terms of my latest work, I've just curated a collection of Sri Lankan, Sinhala, and Tamil stories for a Pakistani online column, Avaz. And that was a point when I really connected up regionally with different regional platforms, and also been translating, involved in translating beyond English. And then the Himal activity has been a pleasant thing, again, to regionally connect with each other. So I'm so happy to be here with so many wonderful other writers and translators. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaia. Our next translator is Ashik Kahina, who unfortunately isn't able to join us this evening. So I'll briefly introduce his translation of G. Nagarajan's Tamil story titled What a Time, What a Creature. In his translator's note, Ashik describes Nagarajan as one of the most original voices in modern Tamil literature, known for his spare, precise prose and his focus on lives at the margins of society. Ashik writes that while the story draws on the familiar figure of the village deity, Nagarajan transforms it into something unexpected, what he calls a distinctly Tamil existentialism. We hope you'll read the full story and Ashik's translator's note on our website this Friday. And now we'll hear from Ravali Piriparthi, who will be speaking about her translation of Manasa Yenluri's Telugu short story, A Letter to Amma. Ravali, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Shweta. It's a joy and honor and pleasure to be here among all of you. Thank you so much thank you so much to Himal for doing this and for bringing all of us together and for creating this opportunity for translations to be at the forefront in so many ways. So thank you for that. I'll quickly share about the short story, Amma Ko Leka, which is translated to A Letter to Amma in English. Amma Ko Leka, A Letter to Amma, is a Telugu short story by Manasa Yenluri. It first appeared in the monthly magazine Chinuku back in 2016. And subsequently, it appeared in Milinda, which was Mansaka's collection of short stories, her debut collection of short stories, for which she won the Yuva Puraskar, Sahitya Academy Yuva Puraskar as well. About the story itself, the story is it's a deeply unsettling and emotionally charged story that takes us into the lives of sex workers. We learn about their aspirations, about their beliefs, their hopes, and also their problems, their hopelessness as well. The story itself captures the voice of Suchitra, who's professionally known as Pinky. The narrative follows her reflections on the brutalized lives of women and girls around her in her place of work, and her desire to be reunited with her family once again, that she was separated many, many years ago. The story starts off as a seemingly ordinary letter exchange between her and her mother. And it gradually unfolds, and we are taken into that world that is governed by cycles of coercion, cycles of violence, and systemic neglect as well. And it shows how all of this often is built, all of these cycles and this kind of society is built on the extreme exploitation of marginalized women and marginalized women's bodies. And yeah, that's about the story. I'll share a little about Mansaka as well. Manasa Yenluri was born in Nellore in Andhra Pradesh. She was brought up in Rajahmundry and currently lives in Hyderabad. She received her education in Rajahmundry as well. Rajahmundry, Elore, and Hyderabad Central University eventually. As a short story writer, she was introduced to the literary world with her collection Milinda, which the story is from, for which she received the Kendra Sahitya Academy Yuva Puraskar back in 2020. She has also received the Alladi Venkata Subbu Award in 2017 and the Madabushi Rangacharya Katha Puraskar in 2020 and the Women's Manifesto Award in 2021. She herself has translated 2 Marathi novels by Sharan Kumar Limbali from English to Telugu, and one of the novels is coming out soon. Her Telugu translation of the Marathi writer Daya Pawar's autobiography Baluta will be published soon. She conducts literary programs through the TK Manogna Sahitya Vedika and runs Vihanga, which is the first ever Telugu women's online literary magazine. She says that although one needs to use their imagination to weave a story, she truly believes that without truth, there can be no existential writing. She loves writing real life stories and considers writing a story as living itself. A little about myself. I'm an educator, I'm a social entrepreneur, and I'm an anti-caste feminist activist as well. And my day job is that I run an NGO called Esther Foundation based in Telangana, and I work with Dalit and Adivasi girls on their aspirations, both professional and personal aspirations as well. We know this, that most girls from marginalized caste backgrounds are pushed into domestic work or very, very low growth kind of jobs, and subsequently their aspirations are crushed. So we work on enabling them to have agency, enabling them to work and move towards their goals and aspirations. Apart from this is my sort of one of the first few translations I've done in the literary circle. I've done a lot of development and professional kind of translation of curriculum documents, etc. So this is one of my first my first tries at doing this kind of work, and I'm deeply grateful and honored to be here. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ravali, and I hope we get to see more of your translations in the future. And I also see that Manasa is here with us today. Manasa, thank you so much for your story. Next translator, Hemang Ashwin Kumar, is also unable to join us this evening, so I'll briefly introduce his translation of Creamy Layer, a short story by a major Gujarati Dalit poet and writer, Nirav Patel. Hemang describes the story as an exploration of caste, mobility, and belonging in contemporary India. It follows a Dalit couple who believe they have transcended caste through education, migration, and professional success, only to confront the enduring realities of caste when they return to Gujarat ahead of their daughter's wedding. Hemang notes that the story raises difficult questions about Dalit emancipation and the persistence of caste, while also reflecting on what is lost and what remains untranslatable when it moves across languages. Please do read the full story and Hemang's translator's note on our website next week. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to invite Fazal Baloch, who will introduce his translation of an excerpt from Syed Hashumi's Balochi novel, Nazuk. Fazal, over to you.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. First of all, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude towards Himal Southasian Fiction Fest for shortlisting my translation as one of the finalists. Indeed, it's a privilege to be amongst the finest translators from South Asian languages. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Fazal Baloch. Currently, I am serving as an assistant professor at Atasha Degree College, Turbat, Balochistan. I have been translating for the past 10 years, and so far I have translated 8 anthologies which include poetry and fiction. The translator, translation I sent to Himal was excerpt from Nazuk. Nazuk is widely regarded as the first ever novel written in Baluchi in 1976. It is the 50th anniversary. We are celebrating it, and the nomination came at a wonderful time for me. The novel is set in the coastal region of Makran. In the mid 20th century, it follows its central character, a woman called Nazuk, who 3 of her husbands die while fishing. Society stigmatized and labeled her as a husband killer and looked upon with suspicion. The novel presents Nazuk as a figure of endurance. After the death of 3 of her husbands, she is left. She is left to face grief, social stigma, and demands of survival. The narrative follow her is she raises her children and navigate a community that treats her with suspicion, and she also resists the advances of womenizers which come from elite class. She also resists the taunts, the jeers of the society. Moreover, the novel is the prime, the location of, is the coastal area of Balochistan, where sea is takes the primary important role in the novel. For the coastal community, it is a source of livelihood, stability, and hope. For Nazuk, however, it becomes associated with loss because she loses 3 of her husband while fishing. And when she agrees to marry for the 4th and final time, she sets only one condition, that her future husband must not take any job at sea. Moreover, the novel also presents a sharp critique of a declining judicial system, corruption, and misrule. And I hope you will enjoy reading the piece. And now I want to share some thoughts about the author. Said Hashmi is widely regarded as the forerunner of modern Baluchi literature. He was born in 1926, and after in 50s, early 50s, he started his literary career. He was not only a fiction writer, but also a poet, a lexicographer who wrote the first ever comprehensive Baluchi to Baluchi dictionary, which contains entries in thousands. Similarly, he also wrote the first book based on the Baluchi orthography, and he also wrote the first book containing the maxim and aphorisms. So, in Baluchi literature, he is widely cherished and regarded as the modern and forerunner of modern Baluchi literature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fazal, and thank you so much to all the translators for those wonderful introductions. Please do head over to the Himal website to read all 6 stories as they are published over the coming days through to 17th June. One of the pleasures of a festival like this is experiencing not only the stories themselves, but also understanding how they travel across languages. So for this part of the evening, we'll be exploring the craft and politics of literary translation with 2 extraordinary panelists. Deepa Bhasthi, an international Booker Prize-winning literary translator working between Kannada and English, and Parwana Fayyaz, a poet and translator working across Dari and Pashto, and a scholar of classical and medieval Persian literature. Deepa and Parwana, thank you both so much for being here.
Hi, Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for having me too, Shweta.
Thank you both. Okay, we have Deepa. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's so nice to see so many friends in the room. Hi, everyone.
And Deepa has been a part of Himal's Fiction Fest in the past, so welcome back, Deepa, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
Deepa, you've written about how Bani Mushtaq's Kannada is shaped by Dakni, Urdu, Arabic, and regional speech worlds, and about your own experience of growing up among multiple Kannada varieties. And Parwana, in your poetry collection, 40 Names, Dari and English coexist in ways that carry histories and memories that don't always sit neatly within one language. For many of us here, translation is imagined as a movement from one language into another, but both of your works and the translators here with us today, they emerge from multilingual spaces. How has that shaped the way you think about and approach translation? Who would like to go?
You want to go
Deepa.
first?
Deepa.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. This is such an honor to be able to talk about translation, which is, for me, really, it's the melting pot, because I've been a poet for years. I've been a scholar. I did comparative literature. I did English, and I do Persian literature. I've done Turkish, Arabic. I've done all sorts of literature. And so, about maybe 7 years ago, I started doing translation just because it's the natural course of reading and interpreting and writing that you come to focus on. And obviously, multilingualism and knowing so many languages, it's just another added privilege, really, right? We grow up with so many languages, in South Asia and Central Asia. It's very normal for us to switch from one language to another, even when we are talking with our friends, classmates, our family, aunts and uncles who have lived in different part of the country. They're visiting. You're speaking in Dari or Persian with one, and then Pashto, you switch to different dialect within the language. So we have constantly grow up with this multilingual background. So it's very easy for us to fall into this category of translators. And I think it's not a given task, really, because it's so natural for us. And I think for me, that comes with a bit of a curse and also a blessing, because I focused too much on translation at some point in my career that I found this imbalance in my role as a scholar, as a poet, that translation was in the meeting point, and I was experiencing all these things that I grew up with, especially this, having different talents and skills in different languages. So I think that's translation is this amazing journey, but at the same time, it feels like it's dragging you in somewhere where there is, you find your readers, but also you're losing certain other things. I don't know how you find it, Deepa, but I'm also a scholar of Sufi literature. So I'm also doing a lot of work with interpreting text, not as a surface level, like the zahir, but also batin, right? The interior, the inward meaning. What does it entail to connect ideas, scenes into the landscape of literature, and then resurfacing it with in a completely different language, and that would be English for me, of course. So I think there is a lot happening, a lot of chaos is happening, especially for someone coming from Afghanistan, right? Every story that I have translated, every poem that I have translated either from one language to another or from memory into English, it has taken this long route of emotional entanglement and trying to understand what it means to translate this, what it means not to translate certain things. And that's why 40 Names became this balance of what happens if I translate certain words and leave certain things untranslated and just leave it there. Like the word for father, mother, sister appears the same way. some colors remains the same because, we all belong to the same tree of languages, right? There is, Madar, Padar, we all know what those words indicate. So I think it just gave me that fluidity. It's not very, simple form of conveying one language to another language. It's more like how do you open that channel of emotions, of a landscape that people don't know yet, but they want to get to know. So there is a lot happening, in that rhythm of communicating a language that might not have a lot more readers, but you're connecting it to wider reader. So I think there's a lot happening: form, content, what appears on the surface, but the inward meaning, balancing that. So for me, that multilingual aspect goes beyond just knowing so many languages, but so many layers into a language and so many emotions. And not to forget about the poetics of our language, right? South Asia, Central Asia, we have that poetry in our language, right? It's so easy to translate in English because there's only one way to say it. But what takes it longer for us to process it as a reader, I'm reading something in Persian, I'm reading something in Urdu. It takes me in a spiral of this beautiful world that I know, but I have to step out and say, how am I conveying that image into English? How do I clear that window that people can see through and they know what I'm seeing? And that's the hardest bit, right? How do you translate the poetics, the poetry in the language? So there is a lot happening here, right? We are struggling in so many different ways, as our great short story translator were talking about, how did they decide to translate even the title of the stories, right? It takes them a while. It's very, in Urdu and other languages and Hindi, it sounds brilliant, but then in English, it's just like solid and static, and it doesn't give that echo, right? So there's a lot happening in that aspect, I think. So, Deepa.
Yeah, I second and agree with everything you have said. I think for those of us in the larger Asian regions, multilingualism is far more common than, we like to believe. I think I'm sure all of us who are from these Asian countries speak at least 3 or 4 languages, if not more, right? And naturally, this does seep into the literature that we write, and all these arguments about how do you convey it into a language which does not have these many, nuances as do all our different languages. And when it comes to, in my case, even Kannada, I've talked about this elsewhere as well, how in the latest example, how the language that Banu Mushtaq used is very different from the same Kannada that I speak. So there are these so many layers to this and so many nuances, so many problems. And for me, the way I like to approach this very difficult task is to try and retain at least some of the words in all of these languages, so as to convey that there are these different different linguistic traditions that are getting into my translations, because I don't want to flatten it out, because in Kannada, when I read it, it is not flattened into one literary Kannada. There is a literary Kannada, which is a very formal textbook like sort of Kannada, but that's not how literature is written, right? So there are these nuances, and that is what becomes important for me to convey. I agree that it might not always work, but then I'm sure we all know that every translation project comes with its own unique challenges. I'm sure we all wish there was one rule fits all sort of situation which would make our lives easier, but that's not how it works. So I think retaining these words, and just to show the reader, no matter where the reader is from, whether from my neighboring state in India or from a country on the other side of the world, that there are all these differences that, I as a reader myself, I like to be challenged when I read something. And I think that's why we read literature in translation as well, because we want to know what someone speaking another language is thinking about and how they see the world and how they describe the world. And if everything is in one plain English, whatever that one plain English, perfect so-called proper English is, then you don't get the poetics of it. You don't get the musicality of the languages that the literature was originally written in. And for me, that becomes very important to retain some sense of where the original language is located within a certain geographical space. So, and that, I think, depending on the project, it takes various different shapes.
One thing that comes through strongly in both your works is that translation is never separate from the politics of language. Deepa, you've written about linguistic hierarchies in India and the place of regional and minoritized languages. Parwana, in both your poetry and your work with Afghan women writers, you've engaged with a context where language, literature, and cultural memory are increasingly under pressure. For example, since returning to power, the Taliban have tried to marginalize Dari as a part of a broader project of erasure. I'm curious whether that changes the way you think about translation. Does translation feel different when the language you're working with feels vulnerable and under threat? And what responsibilities does that place on the translator?
Yeah,
I
mean,
think,
for sure.
sorry, Deepa.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Varun.
No, I think you should go ahead because my head is very muddled with so many ideas.
No, I mean, very honestly, the situation in India right now is obviously not as um, crucial as the case in, for example, Afghanistan. So I'm not sure we can even compare the two situations. But that said, of course, there is a lot of you can't separate the politics from the way language is treated in India, whether it is via imposition of Hindi over South Indian languages, or even within South India for various different reasons. There are many languages which see a lot more translations coming out. For example, Tamil, Malayalam, far more a number of books come out from these languages than Kannada or even Telugu for that matter. So there is a certain I won't say pressure, but there is a certain urgency where you feel like you have to talk about the language as well. To tell people, even within in many parts of India, to say that this is what Kannada is. This is not a minor language. It is a language with about 65 million speakers all over the world. So it's not minor in that in the number of speakers that there are, but it is minor in the sense that not many people know many writers from that language. So there is that extra, I think, apart from all the many things that we do as translators, there is also this expectation, or rather this obligation. I think that's the what I was looking for, to also talk about the language and say that we have all this history, we have all these writers, and this is how we see language, and so on. So that does put a certain obligation, certain pressure on the translator for sure. But I suppose the only answer is to hope that there are more works which come out from these languages, which are under translated for, again, many, many, many political reasons, which too many to go into right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point about more works. Yeah, and I agree with that idea of like more works needs to come out from those marginalized, those languages that we haven't seen resurfacing yet on a state level or on a literary level, right? I think in the case of Afghanistan, I think we have remain uneducated for decades, right? We never had access to the same sort of education, to the same sort of literature production for years, right? So we just were catching up, right? But after 2001, we're catching up. We have poets, fiction writers. We have women coming up and telling their stories in all different forms. But and that is mainly in Dari or Persian and or Pashto, right? Even there is a tendency that our Pashto speakers would be writing in Persian because we are, adjacent to Iran, and they have a great literary circle, great literary, respect for what it means to write in Persian. So there is a sense that if they're writing, they want to see it in print. If they're writing, they want to see it being with the readers, right? So there is the tendency that if this marginalized, say, a Nuristani writer writing somewhere in the middle of the country in Afghanistan, or an Uzbeki or Hazaragi author is writing something, where is their work getting printed, or would be circulated? Who is interested in translating it into what language, for what purpose, right? So there's a lot of those questions, right? That if you never had that basic education, what it means to be writing, or what it means for your work to be represented in one way or the other as belonging to you, and as a result of helping your language to survive, your sense of identity, what it means. If you have never had that conversation with anyone, there is no certain importance set on any of this form of work we are thinking, right? Translation and activism goes hand in hand. Every time I pick a short story, I'm reading it, I know the message that it inhabits. I know that there is a bigger message that connects this very local story to a global issue. And I'm interested in conveying that. But there are other stories that comes, and this is in a local dialect, it's Hazaragi, or in Uzbeki, certain words. And that writer is trying to preserve this language she grew up with inside the house, but then she's writing in Dari. We try to protect that, right? We try to, kind of, as Deepa said, we try to put it in the same language, trying to balance. But still, we don't have it. We don't have the same amount of writing to call it a form of, movement toward reviving a language that's forgotten, a language that's going to be forgotten in a few years. So yes, there is that limitation, right? About what kind of work is out there, we don't even know. Like, I wish I had the privilege or the chance of going to Afghanistan and finding local libraries, local writers, and
Parwana,
you
is
missed
it just
that bit.
your audio cut out briefly there?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, we can
My
hear you.
Wi-Fi might be a little. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, so I'm just saying that we have taken in the case of Afghanistan, I think, sadly, this whole this role of what is out there for us to bring to the surface, or if it's marginalized or forgotten, how to bring it back. We've taken a big distance from it because we haven't really supported or given recognition to the already existing writers in major languages of Pashto or Dari, let alone the marginalized one, right? So we are at the brink of just feeling very handicapped as Afghan, Persian scholars, translators, trying to figure out how is that literary scene or landscape look like in the present day Afghanistan. It's just very shaky at the moment, and that's the sad part of the whole thing. And the few authors that we have been working with that are all around the world now, they keep writing, they keep sending us story, right? I'm aware of it because I'm not, actively work with Untold, but I'm writing an article for them on the importance of fiction writing and the act of translating those fiction for the world. But again, we have this conversation. Our writers usually say, why do we have to translate? Why do we have to tell the story? Why, while we write this story for example, the Taliban to read and learn something, that we have a story to tell, our audience is the people that we write in the language for, why do we have to translate? That's where you question your role as a translator. Like, where does my activism fit in, right? Who am I serving by translating, right? So there's a lot of these questions that comes, right? Who are we translating for? Why is this translation even put up front? There's so much. You have to deal with it, right? But again, you have to stop yourself, otherwise you won't do the work. But to keep saying, it's the women's voices that matters. It's their story that matters. It's what they are writing to the world that matters, right? So we have to really keep that mindset at work. Otherwise, there's so many things that can pose as a sign and say, we might not be doing our job right.
Sorry, if I can just add to that. I mean, all these questions are absolutely debilitating, but I think even going beyond the questions of language then, itself, this idea of who gets to translate, I think that is also something that I'm sure all of us as translators ask ourselves. And who gets to be translated? Usually these are not just from the major languages which are around, but also writers who have had a certain probably history of being published in certain places and so on. So, the more one reads in whichever language, for me, when I read in Kannada, it's very hard to move away from this notion that there are so many extraordinary stories which, again, for many political reasons, do not get the kind of attention that many major writers get. I'm not saying the major writers are not amazing. They are, of course, but so are the writers who, for whatever reasons, don't get the kind of publishing attention that somebody else might get. So these are all, I think, intensely political. And, like Parwana said, I think at some point you just have to stop trying to deal with these questions, otherwise you'll never get any work done. And so, but then this is something we also have to cope with. So it's very difficult, and it's on an everyday basis. Probably just typing out the translation is the easy part, because it comes at the end of having dealt with all these questions and the whys and the whats and for whom and so on.
For those of you listening, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat below. And Parwana, you said translation in many ways is a form of activism. And even within South Asia, some literary traditions have greater visibility in English than others, like you just said, Deepa. And Deepa, you've written about how little Kannada translation, how little Kannada literature is translated compared to other Indian languages. And Parwana, there are still remarkably few works from Dari and Pashto available through mainstream English language publications. If you could change one thing about the current translation ecosystem, what would that be? And what responsibilities do the rest of us, publishers, editors, writers, and readers, have in making that change possible?
I mean, I think I would say we all need to read a lot more translations. Maybe because, sometimes I feel like there are more translators than there are readers for these works. I know personally a lot of friends who are very avid readers, but somehow hesitate to read translations, whether it is from Indian languages or from South Asian or any Asian language. Somehow they feel that it is too not really the cup of tea. Whereas they're very happy to read something from, again, this is absolutely no shade on literature translated from European languages or elsewhere, but we don't read our stories enough, I think. And I suppose if we were to read it a lot more, then we would naturally go seeking these stories in places like Himal Southasian, or maybe in anthologies which are published in print form or whatever. And that, in a way, sort of circles back to people being more interested in the act of translation, in dealing with language and so on. And thereafter, maybe there'll be more translators. So, I think readership, I think we all are, I'm sure all of us here are readers, and this includes us as well. We just have to start by reading more translations. Maybe that is one way to approach all these inequalities in the publishing sphere.
Yeah, that's a good point about readership missing, because the best translations are the ones that it's someone who reads a lot already and knows how to interpret stories and find that poetry or poetics, and to be able to kind of convey that. And that's what makes things such an interesting thing for me, knowing as a translator how, because I also translate for academic purposes. So I translate medieval Persian poetry into English for my own scholarly work. And it's so interesting to see when you're talking with people, so easy for you, right? As a translator, you can just use AI because major languages is so easy to translate, but AI generated text and whatnot. And there is a, Deepa, what you're saying, we're also shifting that we have become a lot more in producing something, right? Because we have help and external help, but also readership is something that you have to take the time and focus on the text. And thus, translation is the last stage. It's the process of from reading into understanding into rewriting or recopying what's being there, right? So I think that is, we are also missing that bit, because with the AI and everything that makes your work easier as a translator is that you miss that poetry, right? AI can't generate poetry, right? And you can't, that heals of emotions, that landscape that you can see through, it's not going to give you that, right? So we are missing that bit. And a lot of translation could be, gearing up, and there will be a lot more people to put their hands on translation because it has made it easy. So, right. And I remember this moment when I decided to translate was when I read this story. It was on my computer and I was reading and I couldn't understand and reading it on my computer because I love reading physical copies. So I printed the story, sat down with a pen, and as I was reading, because I think in English, right? Because this is what we are all doing, right? Our thinking has a language, specific intellectual language. And I start echoing the echo of the words and language in the back of my head in English. So I will write it down, right? That's how translation happened for me. That telling myself, I interpret the stories at the back of my head in English. So that's how it really, kind of this reflective moment that sometimes we miss when we are sitting on the computer and trying to translate, but reading, and the wholesome experience of it as a result is that it becomes this work that encompasses a little bit of the originality, but the storyteller, hoped for us to have conveyed through our translation. And another very important part about this bit is that it's not about translating the text from one language to another, it's translating the writer. I don't know if we are able to do that, right? How are we translating the author? How are we translating the nuances? And we creating that space where we, as a translator, discussing with other translators, saying, when you're reading a work, are you imagining sitting next to the writer? Or who are you in relation to the writer? I don't know how we fail. Like I work on, most of the time, I sit next to a medieval poet that I don't know how he looks, or it's always he, sadly. And this is the difference. I work on medieval Persian literature, always male poets. And then I have all female Afghan poets who are writing, in contemporary time. So there has to be a balance. I feel so much connected to Afghan poets and writers present rather than the poet. So I try to dismiss the image of the poet sitting next to me saying, this is what I want you to translate, right? But there is a sense that you try to echo, because there's so much psychological experiences that goes into writing a story or telling or writing a poem, right? How do you convey that, right? How do you find yourself being a companion to the storyteller? So there is a lot of those questions that I ask myself, maybe because I'm a scholar and I have this tendency to get into this circle of questioning and critiquing myself, right? But I think we're struggling with so many other things at the moment, the ecosystem that we exist, we find ourselves existing and trying to figure it out. But I think one thing that we know is, not being translated is those, marginalized languages that are written in a very vernacular way, right? Those are the things that AI won't be able to read, computer won't be able to help us. And that's when we need actual experts. And I think this is something we might shift our focus down the line in how we create like, agencies and organizations that are out there to help reviving certain languages or literary culture. But that itself seems, a little too far from the kind of world we are dealing with, right? Everyone is going toward one way of advancement and enhancement, and rather than focusing on literature, right? I think we are just taking a lot more distance from literature as a whole. And I think, I don't know, it's just translation is the least problem of the world, I feel. No one is talking about it, right? We read great poets, Paul Celan in English, and we read so many other great, Russian poets and storytellers in English. But that has had its own time, right? Early 20th century, everyone was interested in that. So in the 21st century, I don't know where that global interest in translation exists. And as for, South Asia, Central Asia, that part of the world, we are dealing with so many, other things. I think we are more focused on translation, on trying to give recognition to our literary world than the world itself, which is such a great thing. I think I'm talking mainly as an Afghan being able to see, as you say, Shweta, there wasn't much happening, and it still is not happening in the fiction world or in the aspect of translating Afghan literature into English, right? We've been very far behind. So it's just picking up. And that's why Untold, right, the organization I work with, they've done this amazing job, right? And this is the start. And I believe in their work and the great things they're going to do. It's just a matter of one person knowing what it means to publish a story. It starts from there. And this is how this writers start having their work appearing all around the world, because there was someone interested in publishing their work in the original language, in Kabul, in Mazar, in Herat. And as a result of that, readership within Persian or Pashto speaking scene, we could get to see other interested, readers out in the world. So it starts with one person knowing the importance of publishing and delivering that literature to the world. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Thank you both so much. We'll now open up the floor to one final audience question. We do have a question from Tirangi Jayatilaka. She's saying, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on the politics of translation, about who gets translated and which translations cross borders and get more visibility on a larger global scale. So maybe just a few closing thoughts on that.
Do I go? Okay. No, I think it's firstly limited by the translator's reading interests, by the access that we have to certain kinds of literature as well. Because the projects that I choose are limited to what interests me. It is the language that I like to read, or maybe a theme that I want to sort of work on. For example, in Karnataka, there is the northern districts of Karnataka has a kind of Kannada which I can understand, but I can't speak. And it is the most extraordinary kind of Kannada. The way they see the world, the way they describe the world in the same language that I speak, is just something that I can't even sort of comprehend at times. And I would give anything in the world to be able to translate those stories and novels or whatever, works of literature from there into English. But I can't, because it's my limitation. I don't understand the soul of the language, the soul of that kind of Kannada. So I think that sort of speaks for what we as translators end up picking up on. Maybe there are aspects of community, of culture, of language, of politics, whatever, that we don't understand and we don't attempt because, again, for personal reasons. And in my case, I'm not a full-time translator. I don't translate one book after the other. I focus on my own writing. So that again, there is, I have to be extra picky about what I choose because again, I'm limited by time. So I think these are all like very practical issues that, we have to grapple with before we even get to the who gets to translate, who gets to be translated sort of question. The very fact that we are, this is just one of the 100 other things that one might be doing.
Mm.
So I think these are that's what sort of influences what we end up translating.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I think it's thing I want to add on that. For me, I think because I've always been in the process of editing, choosing, reading 500 stories and then choosing which needs to be translated. There is always the standard for a good story and a good storyteller's world that needs to be translated. Is it, can it be translated, right? A good story makes a good translation. It's as easy that we are not going to add, as a translator, we're not adding another layer, another curtains over a story to make it any better. The story has to be good enough to translate it. I think it's I don't, as you said, it's a critical and a practical skill. It's not something that you can make an enhancer. You're not an editor, you're a translator. So you're a reader, interpreter, and a translator. You can edit after the translation, but that's a whole different matter, right? But I always think that's a matter of a good story or a good poem that needs to go out in the world that makes this local matter connected to the global matter, right? A sense of motherhood that appears in a story, and it's weaves into this wholesome experience of a mother struggling, losing a child. That's a global matter. That's gonna, make the reader wonder. So, yeah, I think that's the politics is something that, as a translator, we might see certain, banned authors, certain authors that we think are, I don't know, doing something that certain individuals don't like to read them. As translators, I don't think we get to choose. We translate what story makes the best point and how it is encompassing within the story, within the piece, or within a work. Poetry is very critical because it's compact, it's unified, it's momentarily. I think politics, the political ideas can cut across, in a metaphor or in a simplified way, but we still translate it, right? Farokh Farasad, the famous Iranian poet, right? Her translation, every time you pick, you can either translate it as a purely poetry, or you can convey the politics or political views embedded in it, right? But because it's a matter of form, and we're translating the form as well as the content, that's where things becomes balanced, right? And then again, the politics of who is choosing what story, who is publishing what story, it's a different matter. And thank goodness, as translators, we don't go with that politics. I don't know, Deepa, about you. We translate what interests us, what comes to us, a story that we love to tell to the world. So.
Which is also, again, heavily influenced by our reading, our lived experiences, our experience of the world. So what I think is a good story might not be another's opinion as well. So again, that's another additional layer of complication, right? So it's just so subjective, what is a good story or what is a good poem or what needs to be translated. These things are so subjective. So, it's just, you never know. And then, it's very complicated. I'm not sure why we do it some days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On that note, thank you so much again, Deepa and Parwana, for such a engaging and thoughtful conversation. We'll now move on to the final part of tonight's program, presenting the shortlist and winner of the 2026 Armory Square Prize. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you so much, Swetha, and it's really an honor to be here tonight, on behalf of the Armory Square jury. We're just thrilled to that Himal has partnered with us for the Fiction Fest, and we are really excited to hear from our 5 shortlisted translators. I'd like to just briefly kick it over to Pia Sawhney, who's going to say a few words about the Armory Square Prize, and then I'll introduce our 5 finalists and we'll hear from them.
Thank you, Jason. It's really my pleasure to join you and our jury this year to announce this year's winner. And thank you to Himal Southasian. It's always such a joy to be here. I'm Pia Sawhney. I'm the founder of the Armory Square Prize for South Asian Literature and Translation. And this is our 4th year judging and administering the prize. Just a little bit of background: as part of our deliberations, our jury considers factors like the quality of the translation, the significance of the original work, and the degree of underrepresentation of the language in the US publishing market. And launched in July of 2022, the Armory Square Prize is an effort to remedy the stark disparities in literary translation worldwide and to support compelling storytellers from the Indian subcontinent by raising their visibility in the US. Little bit of trivia that we like to highlight: of the nearly 7,600 books published in translation in the United States over the past decade, only 64, or fewer than 1%, originated from a South Asian language, even though these languages are spoken by a full 1/5 of the world's population. Back to you, Jason.
Thanks so much, Pia. I'm just going to say a few words about this year's prize. As Pia said, this is the 4th iteration of the prize, and we had a theme this year of retranslations of works published after 1930 with the goal of bringing fresh life to modern classics from the South Asian canon. 5 entries were selected as finalists, reflecting the breadth, linguistic complexity, and robust modern literature of South Asia. So the first of our shortlisted finalists I'd like to ask read would be Rahul Soni, who translated Dharmveer Bharati's The Seventh Horse of the Sun. Just reading from the jury citation, Dharmveer Bharati's The Seven Horse of the Sun is a distinctly modern book set in post-independence Allahabad, and its overlapping, ironic love stories are timeless and universal in the best traditions of storytelling. This book is kind and knowing, mischievous and wise, and a great fun to read. Rahul Soni's fresh translation is a delight. Over to you, Rahul.
Thanks, Jason. And yeah, very happy to be on this short list among all my colleagues here. So I'll just read a little bit about the work and then read a couple of paragraphs from the translation. First published in 1952 and never out of print since, Dharmveer Bharati's Suraj Ka Satwaं Ghoda, or The Seventh Horse of the Sun, is a modern classic, and it's perhaps my favorite novel in Hindi. Set in the city of Allahabad in newly independent India, this is a formally inventive novel, and its themes include love, class, caste, gender, and the nature of storytelling. The narrator recalls a long ago summer when Manik Mullah, a worldly wise older friend, entertains his friends by telling them a series of stories over 7 afternoons. The narrative is non-linear, and the stories overlap and are told in varying styles that look at characters and events from different perspectives. And these are interspersed with commentary from the friends, conversations, arguments, and even dreams. I'll now read the first page of the prelude that opens the novel. Before I present this novel, composed of Manik Mullah's remarkable moral love stories, entitled The Seventh Horse of the Sun to you, perhaps it's better that you learn who Manik Mullah was, how we came to hear his love stories, what his beliefs about and experiences in love were, and what his original theories were about the technique of storytelling. I say was, because I don't know where he's now, what he's doing, whether we'll ever see him again. And just so that in case he really has disappeared, his stories don't disappear with him, I'm presenting them to you. There was a time when he was well known in our mohalla. He was born here, grew up here, made a name for himself here.
and it was from here that he disappeared as well. Our mohalla is a large one, divided into many quarters, and he lived in the quarter that was the most mysterious and colorful, and about whose residents, both new and old, many strange stories were rife. Mullah wasn't a nickname, it was his caste. He was Kashmiri. His family had lived here for many generations, and he stayed with his brother and sister-in-law. When they were transferred, he had the entire house to himself. There was such a spirit of cultural freedom and communism in his house that even though we all lived very far away, it became our regular gathering place. We thought of him as a guru, and he too harbored a deep and genuine affection for us. Whether he had a job or was still studying, where this job was if he had a job, what he was studying if he was studying, we were never able to find out. There was no sign of any books in his room. Yes, there were a few strange objects he wouldn't normally find in other people's rooms. For instance, a poster hanging on the wall in an old black frame. Eat, grow strong. A large, beautiful knife with a black hilt that was kept on a shelf, an old horseshoe lying in a corner, and a number of other odd things whose significance we couldn't quite understand. What interested us more, though, was that there were always peanuts in winter at his house and melons in summer. And so all of us would also always be there. When you have free time, when you have an entire house to yourself, and when you have a group of friends sitting together, you can be sure the conversation will turn to politics at some point. And when interest in politics begins to wane, the conversation will turn to love. At least for the middle classes, there is no third subject. Manik Mullah was equally interested in politics and love, but when it came to literary discussions, he favored love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahul. That was beautiful. Before we move on to our next reader and shortlisted translator, I'd like to mention that all of our translators on the shortlist, excerpts from their work will be available over the course of the next year in Words Without Borders, the premier journal of international literature. And of course, the winner will be published by Open Letter Books. Our next reader will be Shairi Devnath, who will be reading from Jibanananda Das's The Spirit Woman's Fairy Tales and Other Stories. The jury citation reads, "These posthumously discovered stories by Jibanananda Das, Bengal's greatest poet of solitude and nature, bring his delicate appreciation of loneliness and a beautiful despair to the lives of individuals dismissed as indolent and incapable. Shairi Devnath's new translations restore the feather touch of grief and greatness to Das's fiction." Shairi?
Hi, thank you, Jason, for the very lovely introduction. So, what was very interesting about Jibanananda Das's short fiction was that he's often considered the greatest poet of Bengal, second only to Tagore, who's incomparable in every sense of the word. But for Jibanananda Das, who also wrote fiction, it was only discovered posthumously. And I've translated his earliest fiction, which were written between 1931 and 33. And it was so interesting because this was, around a decade and a half before India gained independence. And in these short stories, we were already seeing a fatigue with the urban way of life. And I think there was a lot of fatigue about finding employment in the 9 to 5 format of it, and there was an undue pressure on men to go to a city like Calcutta and make a living, and they were unhappy about it. They preferred their life back in the villages, and they did not want to be in the city. They did not want to live in poverty. They did not want to go to office, and these are well educated men who came from well-to-do families, but they were suddenly in the city and they were battling poverty. They were living in boarding houses, and they were eating maybe, one meal a day, 2 meals a day. And I think that is the kind of suffering that really bothered him. And his own life was very similar to the kind of people that he was writing about. And even though the collection is called The Spirit Woman's Fairy Tale, the portion that I will be reading from is called, the story is called A Magnificent Journey. And yeah, onto it now. He was returning home from Calcutta after 4 years. All he had by way of worldly possessions were a tin trunk, a mattress wrapped in a faded floor mat, and 3 rupees and 9.5 annas in his wallet. He was completely free, at least in one respect. He needed permission from no supervisor to leave Calcutta. There was no supervisor to speak of anyway. Life was free from the drudgery of work. The days were bright and sunny. He could stare at the big blue sky for as long as he wanted, glide in the spring sunshine like a honeybee, and in the long lazy afternoon observe the gentle-mannered sparrows on the boarding house veranda. At College Square, he could sit on a bench in the shade of a tree and spend the entire morning looking at its branches and hearing the birds and the wind singing in its leaves. A dry brown leaf would fall, a new green leaf would sprout. The green bench would soon be covered with brown, nut-colored leaves. The deodar tree, some distance away, was short and plump, and there was not a single leaf on a cotton tree's branches, just many fiery red flowers. The crows had spread their wings like the hood of an alert snake. The endless mornings would be happily spent here. No one would come demanding an explanation. The office-bound workers in trams and buses, so busy and breathless, would seem more peculiar than ever. The Deodaru tree's beauty and bounty would be the only worthy truth. The birds in the trees would be more real than ever. So too would be his own existence. He would spread his mat and sleep on the terrace on one such night and imagine a new life waiting for him in a faraway future. The Deodaru tree and the palm trees knew of it too. On such nights, black and long, the bird's nest, homely and wet with dew, would be the most desirable picture of tranquility. His days would pass happily thus. This was entirely acceptable to Prabhat. However, there was a small problem, a shape, a match, and every smallest thing required money, which he had none. So, this is a portion from, he has quit his job, and next morning he feels as free as a bird. And even though he has no money in his pocket, he's glad about not having a job. He feels it is better to be poor in a city than traveling in packed trams and buses and sweating all through the day and yeah, and listening to your boss shout at you and going home with just a few rupees of your salary. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charity. That was wonderful. Our next reader is Vaibhav Sharma for his translation of Kamaleshwar's The Town of 57 Streets from Hindi. The jury citation reads, Vaibhav Sharma's masterful translation of Kamaleshwar's The Town of 57 Streets, the groundbreaking Hindi modernist dramatic tableau of small-town India at mid-century, excavates and reclaims the novel's queer narrative and beauty in the sublime. Abandoned sons, witnesses for hire, theater troupes, and thieving gangs entwine, double-cross, and emerge again in this timeless story about all the ways we moonlight so that we may stay alive. Vaibhav?
Hi, thank you, Jason. Hi, everybody. Kamleshwar's Hindi novel, which came out in 1956 in a serialized version in Hans magazine, was later published by Punjabi Pustak Bhandar in 68, and then later on by Rajpal in 79. It's set in the hometown of Kamleshwar himself. He was born there, but he never visited it after he left it because he had lots of, apparently, from his own writing, he had lots of guilt around the fact that he left. And then and it's a queer story. It's about two men and one woman, love triangle, and Kamleshwar is writing. It's his debut novel. He's writing at a time when there's a lot is of course lots of censorship, and they had seen what happened to Pechan Sharma Pandey's Pandey Pechan Sharma's chocolate boys, and what happened to Ismat Chughtai's stories earlier than that. Everybody, so he had to put a lot of queer undertones inside the narrative, inside a dialogue, inside the story angles, rather than saying outright, "Hey, these two men are in love," or they might be. It is more presented in the sense that this is a situation where one guy is not sure what's happening, and the other guy is also not sure what's happening, but something is happening with them. I would like to say a little bit about Kamleshwar before I get to the story. Kamleshwar was born in 1932 in Uttar Pradesh, India. He made his debut in the literary scene in 1948 with his short story Comrade when he was 16. His debut novel, Ek Sadak Sattawan Galiyan, was published in 1956. He was also a well-known script and dialogue writer for Hindi films like Andhi, Mausam, Choti Si Baat, and Sautan. His most well-known novel, Kitne Pakistan, was published in the year 2000. He was awarded the Sahitya Academy Award and Padma Bhushan, the third highest civilian award in India. He sadly passed away in 2007 at the age of 75. Now I'm going to read a small excerpt, which is from chapter 9, where Shivraj, one of the main characters, who's a younger guy in the situation, is trying to figure out what exactly is happening to him and his friend and or landlord Sarnam. Here we go. Shivraj woke up in the morning to find Sarnam asleep beside him on the cot, an arm draped across his chest. This wasn't new. Shivraj should have grown used to it by now. 4 years had passed living this way. It bothered him a lot at first. Sarnam told him constantly, "Whenever I look at you, I remember my youth. What you are today, I was 16 years ago. The same passion, the same attitude, the same innocence. When I see you, I'm reminded of those days." He would let out a cold sigh and then add, "The lost days will never return." He would take Shivraj's hand in his, pinch his fingers, look at his nails, run a finger along his arm, and touch every hair with tenderness. Then suddenly he would react as if he had woken up from a dream. "Get out of my sight." Sometimes a bewildered Sarnam would hold him in his arms. He would bury his face in his hair and take deep breaths. Lifting his chin, he would say, "Look at me." Like a helpless bird, Shivraj would stare at him while his body struggled to get out of his grip. Sarnam would loosen his hold and say, "Shib, who were you to me in my past life?" Once I grabbed my mother this way. I felt my breath grow heavy at the moment. She struck me in anger. Afterwards, she cried while trying to soothe me. Then he would lose himself to such thoughts as if he could see his mother somewhere. Shivraj's heart, which had been full of guilt a moment ago, would fill with tenderness towards him. Many times, Sarnam would find glimpses of his long-lost friends and lovers in Shivraj, their expressions, faces, features, and expectations. At times, he would find the way Shivraj sat similar to that of an estranged friend who he deeply loved. If Shivraj dressed up, it reminded Sarnam of his own blissful youth, and to relive it, he held Shivraj by the arms and pulled him in front to take another look. He made sure that Shivraj knew the reasons or emotions behind each of his desires and their supposed purity. All things of fashion and indulgence were available for Shivraj at all times. If he found out that Shivraj needed something, the said item would be ready and available the next day. And Shivraj constantly wondered what all this affection and love was, and why it stank rancid. What's the extent of this? At what point does the rot set in? To what extent should he accept it? What boundaries should he set? He built all this up in his head every day, and every day it all came crashing down. I would like to thank Armory Square Prize and Himal for hosting this and for giving me this opportunity. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Vaibhav. That was very powerful. Great. Our next translator is Rohan Chhetri. His translation from Nepali of Parijat's Flowers of the Siris Tree was described by the jury in the following words, quote, Flowers of the Siris Tree is a brutal and brutally perceptive novel evoking the troubled, self-justifying mindset of a Gurkha veteran of World War II, quote, hollowed out and haunted by the atrocities of war, quote, in the words of the translator Rohan Chhetri. The soldier's voice in this first-person book is a marvel, lucid on his own subjectivity and victimhood, utterly clouded on that of anyone else, particularly women. The novel takes on the weightiest subjects with the deftest touch and earned Parijat, Nepal's Madan Puraskar Prize, the first woman to be so awarded. Translating it with sufficient sensitivity and elegance will be a challenge of the first order, and one Chhetri is meeting admirably. Over to you, Rohan.
I'm going to get right into it because we don't have a lot of time. So Parijat was a nom de plume chosen by the writer Vishnu Kumari Waiba. She was born in Darjeeling, India on September 16th, 1937, and died on December 4th, 1993 in Kathmandu. At the age of 56. Out of the 9 novels, several short stories and poetry collections and memoirs that she wrote during her lifetime, only a very few have been translated. Shirishko Phul, which I have translated as Flowers of the Siris Tree, her most acclaimed work, for which she won the Madan Puraskar in 1965, was published in 1964. This book is a trailblazing work that decentered aspects of narrative possibility in Nepali fiction. The book, as Jason mentioned, is narrated through the voice of Suyog Bir Singh, a middle-aged Gurkha veteran of World War II, who would today be diagnosed with combat PTSD. Prisoned through his fever-pitched voice, Parijat channels a consciousness which is at once an ironic exercise in the banality of patriarchal violence, as well as an interrogation, and I feel more importantly, an interrogation of the active production of the Gurkhas as martial race doctrine that suffuses colonial and post-colonial understanding of Nepali masculinity. My current translation seeks to bring the text closer to the original spirit of Parijat and to realign and reinstate the formal rigor of the original into the English translation. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from chapter 9. I guess we're all reading chapter 9 today. The face of a Chin woman materializes before me. She glares at me as she passes by. Strong limbs, wheatish complexion, clear eyes without a hint of inhibition, matted hair. She leans against the trunk of a mahogany tree, waiting to ambush a prey. It is around midnight, unaware of the presence of soldiers camouflaged in the jungle. She waits, lulled by the sound of the gurgling river. Glowing in the moonlight, manifested in the fragrance of wildflowers, if you could call a being celestial, she was it. Unaware, irreproachable, unbitten by the insect of existence, how could one just sit and only look at her? Does she not know, poor thing, the places that men have trespassed into? That even in this desolate jungle at midnight, she isn't alone. This is where the Gorkha soldiers have camped in. The Japanese may arrive here any day now. Then there will be bombardment, and soldiers have hidden in the thicket, waiting to kill or be killed. But this doesn't distract her from her hunt. If she kills a prey, she will eat half of its flesh raw. Descended from a line of men who decapitate heads and worship them, she flashes her strong arms in the moonlight and concentrates. The more I watch her, the more I am strangled by the camouflage I hide in. The more I feel despair about the war, the more I want to escape from this thicket, and a deep pity for my own brief existence washes over me. I want to plunder this moment. I begin to say in my head, "Oh, delicate daughter of Chin, it isn't just my existence that bears no meaning anymore. It is yours too. It is your death too that means nothing. What enmity could lie between you and me? What will you get and what will I, whether this war is won or lost? Only yesterday, at the invitation of your headhunter father, I feasted on the rice and buffalo flanks you served me on a bamboo mat, sitting beside your dog. Plying me with a jar full of liquor, how pleased you looked. Wasn't it you who, when we stepped outside, latched onto me, insisting I drink more and more from the buffalo horn? Unable to resist you, I took it from your hands and drank it to the bottom. Maybe you lusted after me too. Is that why you were pointing at me while you spoke to your headhunter father? You moved with such ease, even in the presence of soldiers, white and brown. You walked with your thighs bare. In your eyes, how many tender thoughts could have been read? But for us, this breed of soldiers, what would any of that mean? Looking at you, I remembered the Kirat woman from the mountains of my home, but their fathers and your father couldn't be more different. Perhaps this will be the final chapter of our remembrance then. Tomorrow we may die, who knows? Dancing on your veranda, I forgot everything for a while. Even death bounding towards us, even my own sorry existence thrown across the front lines of the Burmese borders. When our colonel danced, why did you laugh that way? How do you know how to laugh so openly? Do you also have dreams squirming inside your heart? Do you also like to adorn your hair with a flower and fill your reflection with a smile on the clear waters of the canal? Do you also feel the pangs of the passage of youth and time? When you were dancing, I danced right beside you. I was afraid your father would behead me if I didn't. His bodyguards flanked him with their spears glinting beside them. Through the revelry at your home and through your sweet presence, I was beginning to forget my life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rohan. Last but most certainly not least, I would like to introduce the translator Matt Reek, who translated The Lost Golden Land from Hindi by Ranendra. The jury's citation reads, Ranendra's crime novel sets ambitious journalists, rural Indian chieftains, and corrupt cops up to face one another, sometimes intensely, at other times more viciously. Who is swindling whom, who is chasing whom, and why? There's plenty to savor here as the tale unravels. Intrigue pervades Reek's rich translation, and the story makes plain how critical and purposeful directed journalism continues to be in these times. Told from the perspective of a frightened reporter, the novel grounds itself in fears many will recognize that feel both familiar and bracingly honest. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you. It was so nice to hear everybody's voices and to hear everybody's work. The sad part, I like Armory Square Prize for the initiative of publishing. Wouldn't it be nice if we all got our books published by the here in the US? Sona Lekum Disum, the Golden Land. This is what the Munda called Kokra. Swang Tsang called the river, sparkling with bits of gold, the Swarnakiran. Later, it was called the Swarn Reka. Both mean the river of golden light. The history of Sher Shah's reign tells us that the Afghan army came here to capture a herd of white elephants, in particular, the leader, one Siam Chandra. Stories of his beauty and bravery were famous throughout the dense green sal forests. The diamonds of the sunk river dazzled the eyes of Mughal emperors. Emperor Akbar sent his top general, Shahbaz Khan Kamba, to collect these diamonds, and Emperor Jahangir's top general Ibrahim Khan jailed King Durgansal because he stopped supplying diamonds to the Mughal state. The Swarn Kiran, or Swarn Rekha River, with its sparkling bits of gold, the sunk rivers, dazzling diamonds, Siam Chandra and the herd of white elephants, and above all else, the riches of the green sal forests. This was the Munda's Sona Lekandisam. But then others came who thought they were smarter than everyone else. They started interfering in Singbonga's world. Railroad tracks were laid, and they started to cut down the sal trees. Then the doubt slipped in. Why did the ancestors and Desvali Bonga, the village god, get to take it easy in the majestic trees, but not them. They built ports, they laid rail lines, they made furniture. Right and left, they were cutting down trees to make homes. They started to want all the priceless minerals and ore buried inside Marang Buru. They were worried about falling behind the times. They never felt satisfied. Hunger, their dire enemy, grew and grew. Yet those who are too clever for their own good end up overshooting the mark. The golden land disappeared in the swirling dust kicked up by the restless activity of those who are too clever for themselves. The sacred groves disappeared. Marang Buru Bonga, the mountain god, disappeared. The slow-moving river, the melodious river, the river sparkling with golden nuggets, the river full of diamonds, all these rivers where Ikir Bonga, the water god, lived, all disappeared. The Munda children started to immigrate. The golden land was no more. That's a section of the preface to the novel. It's, I guess, one of the things which is very interesting about listening to everybody's presentations is the emphasis on bibliodiversity. And I think of Ranendra's novel, even though it's written in Hindi, as being within this category of bibliodiversity, in part because it narrates a state in India which is basically excised from the national narrative, Jharkhand. And not just Jharkhand per se, but the Adivasi populations of Jharkhand. So many of the, I call it a polyvocal novel because there is a main character, Kishan Vidrohi, who is murdered, or he's sort of the center of the intrigue. But then going out from the main city of Kishanpur, which is basically Ranchi, there are all of these layers of storytelling. Many of them include local Hindi dialects in Bhojpuri and Mundari, so Munda people speaking in Mundari. That makes it, even within the category of Hindi, an aspect that highlights its bibliodiversity. Ranendra was, he's Bihari. He was working in North Bihar as an IAS officer. He told me this story that I couldn't believe because he's such a gentle person, but he said he got into a pushing match with the superior in the IAS who was basically expressing Hindu nationalist or very bigoted a worldview. And he was sent to Jharkhand as a sort of demotion. And that's where he sort of discovered the intense cultural diversity of the state. And he became the leader of the Tribal Institute in Ranchi for decades, which he just retired from. So I would describe it as a historical novel. There's a lot of history, precious history about the state, which is not really available anywhere else in Hindi literature. It's also an intrigue novel. And in that way, I would say it's, very contemporary in its mixing and matching of genres. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for your reading and for sharing all of that. So I will kick it over to Pia to open the virtual proverbial envelope to announce the winner. We'll let the winner say a couple of words, and then I think we'll move it back to Shweta to wrap things up. So over to you, please, Pia.
Thank you, Jason. Those were some really visceral and incredibly resonant readings. So thank you to the finalists for applying for the Armory Square Prize, and of course for gathering today with us and the Himal Southasian community. The 2026 jury for the Armory Square Prize for South Asian Literature and Translation has selected Rohan Chhetri's translation from the Nepali of Parijat's Flowers of the Siris Tree as the winner of this year's prize. Congratulations, Rohan.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. I wish I had prepared something to say, but I am very pleasantly surprised, and this is amazing. And one of the things about this book and what really sort of has drawn me to translating this is the sheer formal sort of inventiveness of this book. And by way of retranslating this book, what I'm really trying to do is to reinstate some of that formal rigor into the translation, which had perhaps been sort of missed in the earlier translation from the 70s. So yes, I'm very excited to be able to continue doing this work. And thank you, Armory Square Prize, for believing in this book and for believing in Parijat.
Absolutely, you opened our eyes to something we hadn't seen in the past. So thank you for applying. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations once again, Rohan, and also to all the shortlisted translators. And a huge thank you to the Armory Square Prize team and also Himal, and of course our audience as well. We hope you'll continue following Himal's Fiction Fest over the coming weeks. And if you've enjoyed tonight's event and would like to support our work, we'd be grateful if you considered becoming a paying Himal patron. We currently have a special anniversary discount available on our website. Have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are, and thank you so much for joining us.